You are listening to Play Therapy Community Podcast, episode 67.
Welcome to Play Therapy Community Podcast, providing connection, information, and inspiration to child therapists all around the world. Here's your host, a licensed psychotherapist, a registered play therapist, and my mom, Jackie Flynn.
This episode is brought to you by Jackie Flynn Consulting. I provide consultation to EMDR therapists seeking support with challenging cases, desiring to hone their skills, or working towards certification. As a registered play therapist and an EMDR consultant in training, helping clinicians that work with children and adolescents is at the heart of my work. If you're already trained in EMDR therapy and you'd like some consultation support on how to use it best with kids, or specifically how to integrate it with play therapy techniques while still holding true to all 8 phases of EMDR with fidelity, go to my website, Jackie Flynn Consulting, to schedule an appointment. I have a free download of a body scan PDF that I use with my child clients when we target somatic sensations in the body. You can find that at JackieFlynnConsulting.com as well. Now back to our episode. Hey there, Jackie Flynn here. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Play Therapy Community Podcast. Well, when the idea of today's show popped in my mind, I absolutely could not wait to record it. So it's early morning here at the Flynn house, and just Max and I are awake, and I am super excited to share with you my top 15 favorite quotes. Now, my first idea was I'm going to share my top 3 quotes. And that was hopeless. I could not narrow it down to 3. I barely got it down to 15. I love quotes. When I was a teacher, a middle school teacher, I would have a different quote on the board every day, and the kids would write it in their journals. I had affirmation and gratitude journals for them, as well as the quote, and then they would describe what it means, and then we'd do a around the room discussion. So quotes are a biggie for me. And I want to share with you what speaks to my heart, but I want to hear what speaks to your heart too. If you could join our private Facebook group, Play Therapy Community, and just hop in there and just post your favorite quote and let everybody see it, and let's process it and share this stuff. It can be so inspirational. Well, let's dig right in. My first one is by Viktor Frankl. I've read his book, Man's Search for Meaning, many times. Actually, I have it on Audible, and I'm actually rereading it again. When things are tough in my life, I can really relate to it. And it seems really odd that a book about the Holocaust would make people feel better in distressing situations, but this one is. He's amazing, a psychologist that survived the Holocaust and went on to share his knowledge, and he created logotherapy. So very good. So he has this quote. This is my first one. In between the stimulus and the response, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So that little space is important. And I think about how that's utilized in the work that I do. I know, like through the Gottman method, couples therapy, we talk about when you get emotionally flooded, you pull back, calm down, and come back. That's that space. When we're parents and we feel emotionally flooded, we need to just pause and come back and be able to respond to our child rather than to react from these big emotions. When we are just working in the community or discussing something that we're passionate about, you want to allow yourself that little space. And again, that's by Viktor Frankl. Excellent work that he has done. If you haven't read Man's Search for Meaning, you are missing out. Okay, so the next one, I heard about this guy when I was in high school. I read about him in my English language arts class way back a gazillion years ago. So this one is, nobody can bring peace but yourself. Nobody can bring you peace but yourself. This one speaks to me because I think of the locus of control concept, and I think of the struggle people have when they are waiting for someone else to change before they can feel happiness or peace. They're waiting for something else to occur. It's something that's outside of them. And when they do that, they lose control of it. And it can't be changed by anything they do. And that's really sad. So be able to kind of identify, what do you have control over? What can you do? And that's where you can feel some peace. That one I love, by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Okay, this next one, I had the honor of actually meeting this lady back in the 80s. I was just a little girl, but I think about the power of a smile and how, like, the first time that we interact with our kids in the morning is so very important, or when we pick them up at car loop, or just anybody, that first impression after you've been away from each other really speaks volumes. So this one is by Mother Teresa. Let us always meet each other with smile, for the smile is the beginning of love. By Mother Teresa. I think that should be meet each other with a smile. So let us always meet each other with a smile, for the smile is the beginning of love. Okay, this next one, I have particularly been inspired by this because, like, the profession that I'm in as a licensed mental health counselor and a registered play therapist and a certified EMDR therapist. Now I'm working towards certification in Gottman method couples therapy. I'm level 3 trained, and I'm working towards being a consultant. I'm a consultant in training now for EMDR. So I've had many journeys that often were long and hard. So, and also I'm a black belt in Taekwondo, which was that was super hard as well for me. So this is actually, in Taekwondo is where I heard this quote the first time, and I bought a little placard and I have it up in one of our bathrooms at home. But it says, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Lao-Tzu. So that single step, that also reminds me of a quote by Martin Luther King. You don't have to see the entire staircase to take the first step. But a journey of 1,000 miles begins with each step. So you don't want to really kind of think, oh, I have all of this big thing to do it, and just think it's so overwhelming like that. Just take it piece by piece. That also makes me think about the science projects that my kids had. One of the teachers said, inch by inch, it's a cinch. So just take it in little chunks. Okay, so the next one is by Tony Robbins. I use this one all of the time. There's different versions of it, but by changing nothing, nothing will change. So if you do the same thing you've always done, you're going to get the same thing you've always gotten. By changing nothing, nothing changes. So you need to make a change if you want to change. Love that. Super simple, but super, super true. Okay, the next one's by Plato, and I'm a registered play therapist, so I see this in action every day, and it is so very true. You can discover more about a person in an hour of play than in a year of conversation. So with kids, or I do play therapy with many adults. I even do it with couples because it integrates more of the brain. So when we are just using talk therapy, we're limited to certain parts of the brain that has that verbal development and the higher level thinking. But when we do play, we are actually engaging that right hemisphere of the brain. And as you interact with a therapist and words are put to it, reflections and feelings are named and spoken, that left side of the brain is engaged. And when you have both sides of the brain engaged at the same time, and the neurons from each one are firing at the same time, then they wire together. Dr. Siegel says when neurons fire together, they wire together. It actually creates more connections in the brain as those pathways are used more often. So not only do you learn more about a person through the hour of play, there's a lot of healing that goes on. Play is so important, not just for kids either. It's important for all ages. Many of my couples that are come to me in distress, their play is gone. Their play on many realms. Their play with each other, their play in life. That work to fun ratio is off. So, and when we play, when we laugh, when we're having fun, we can be vulnerable. And when we're in vulnerable states, as Brene Brown tells us, life is different. Life is more enjoyable, and we can do more things that are really kind of working towards our dreams and our goals. So that one's by Plato. You can discover more about a person in an hour of play than in a year of conversation. So true. Okay, so the next one is by Anne Radmocher, and hers is courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is a quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I will try again tomorrow. Oh my goodness, this is so good because as parents, I'm thinking specifically as parents, but this can apply to anyone. There's always an opportunity to try better, to try to do something different, to have a different day, to make a new start. I love, there's a tenet in the child-parent relationship therapy by Gary Landreth and some colleagues of his that really speaks to it's not what we did, but it's what we do after we did what we did. So being able to kind of assess what happened and kind of push the reset button and say, okay, I'm going to try again tomorrow. And sometimes that could be just a real soft act, but it sure is courage. So that one's by Anne Radmocher. I hope I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. Okay, so the next one is so good. I quoted this 2 times yesterday with my clients. I did then what I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better, by Maya Angelou. Oh, yes. When you know better, then you can do better. So that really kind of normalizes that you do what you know, but that's the importance of education. I do a lot of psychoeducation. We're doing public speaking events at schools and at different organizations. And really reaching out through this podcast, just trying to educate people because I truly believe when people know better, they do better. And Maya Angelou, I love her quotes. I love her work. I feel like she changed the world. Okay, this next one is by John Gottman, and I'm a huge fan of him and his work. His wife, Julie Gottman, they have changed the world of couples counseling. They gave us some really, really valuable data to really implement and apply treatment plans that can really help couples. So this quote says, and they also, talk about children and parents and emotion coaching. So this one is, geared towards parents. When parents offer their children empathy and help them to cope with negative feelings like anger and sadness and fear, parents build bridges of loyalty and affections. By John Gottman. Now, when we think about when our kids are acting up or they're having big behavior problems, one of our big goes-to is something's wrong with my child. I need help. I need to fix their behaviors. But really, it's not that simple. You need to definitely help them and support that behavior, healthy behavior. But also, as a parent, there are things that you can do in the way that you interact with them and you build up that relationship bank account with them that can help their behavior as well. Because that child-parent relationship is so very important. It really lays the groundwork for their feelings about themselves, their feelings about others, and their capacity to have healthy relationships. So again, that's by John Gottman. When parents offer their children empathy and help them to cope with negative feelings like anger, sadness, and fear, parents build bridges of loyalty and affection. And I think of empathy as when somebody feels like you care about them, it is a whole different ballgame. I have had bosses before that I didn't think that they cared about me at all. So I kind of just did what I had to do and then I went home. But I have had bosses that wrote me little Post-it notes about, I know my last one that I had working at a local school, Sculptor Charter School in our community, wrote me a little note. I love what you're doing with the kids. Keep up the great work. And I posted it on my little filing cabinet by my desk when I was a school counselor. And I worked so hard at that job. I would go home and I would just daydream about more things that I could do that would help the students and what impact I could make. And I was really motivated because I felt like I was valued. And when we can do that with our clients and the people that we work with our children, just kind of really have that empathy, like, hey, I care about you, then that social brain, that feeling of connectedness, that feeling felt, as Dr. Siegel says, can happen, and that's healing. So I love that quote. Okay, so this one by Maya Angelou, I have another one of hers. Actually, I have 3 of hers because she's like awesome. But this one is so true. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Now, when I first heard this, I thought, that sounds a little bit bitter. You got to give people second, third, fourth, fifth chances. You got to be forgiving. And that's true. You do need to be forgiving and you do need to be open to repairs in relationships. But know that people do show you who they are. And when they show you who they are, believe them. It's not that it will always be negative. Sometimes they'll show you who they are, that they really care and they're really compassionate. But sometimes they'll show you who you are and it's something that isn't necessarily right for you in your life at that time in healing. I know as a couples counselor, I see many people that come to me and the very things that drew them together, brought them together, and attracted them to each other are the things that are repelling them when they're sitting there and in distress, struggling relationship-wise. So really, when you first meet somebody, really pay attention to those interactions and know that they're giving you some information on who they are. Okay, this next one's also by her, Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Now, this is actually based on some, I don't think she knew this just kind of intuitively, but this is has some brain research behind it now. The memory part of the brain is so very connected to the emotions part of the brain. When we have really strong emotions, we're more likely to remember it. So those long lectures that we give to our kids, which I don't do, I have done before, I learned this knowledge, but giving long lectures and just really trying to give information when not focusing on emotions that the person's feeling, or whether it's peer-to-peer or whether it's teacher or parent or whomever, you need to connect and redirect. So you need to have that emotional connection and then be able to share that information. If you just try to give the information without any connection, without helping people to feel good, then that information is going to get lost. I know I had a great teacher in high school. Her name was Mrs. Metz, and now it's Mrs. Sparkman, but she was amazing. She was like my inner voice when I went into the Army, and the Army was such an environment that felt really stressful to me as a young adult. I'm sure probably still would at this time if I was in basic training again, maybe even a little more so. But she just, she made me feel good. And I really, really, hold her in my heart for that. But I can't remember anything I learned in her class, really, in world history. I don't remember that, but I remember how she made me feel, and it made me feel confident and competent and worthy and all of those good things that help our children take risk and really grow and thrive in the world. So people do remember how you make them feel. Also, like this applies to, just imagine when big events happen and you had big feelings, you can remember little details of that time. So I remember like when 9/11 happened, I was actually living on a boat with my husband at that time, and it was about 9 a.m. on the East Coast. And I think he called. Somehow I learned of the 9/11 incident. I stayed home from work that day because I had a paper due for school. So I took a vacation day and just knocked out one of my papers. I can't remember what it was on at that time. But I remember when I heard about 9/11, and then I think I flipped on the TV and watched it, and I still remember like the weather outside was like, it was early morning, so I could hear the birds and stuff. I remember having this deep feeling of despair, just really vivid memories from that time. But the day before that, I have no idea what happened because there wasn't strong emotions attached to that memory. So emotions are so very important. A lot of times that's one of the hardest things for people to reprocess in my trauma therapy are when a big event happens, how others responded to them. That can make or break a situation in somebody's ability to heal. Okay, this next one. I've read The Gift of Therapy so many times. That book is so good. I love that book. I don't know why I didn't read it earlier, but it's by Dr. Irvin Yalom. I actually sent him an email and he responded right away. I was wondering about, like in the book, he shares a lot of case studies, and I was wondering, how did he do that? Did he get consent from the client and change around details? Turns out he super changes around a lot of details and gets consent from the client, like every safeguard possible, so that information's still confidential, but yet he can share those stories to help people understand therapy, whether the therapist or clients. But I was super excited to get his email back because I plan on writing a book on EMDR and play therapy. So I would like to at least, model, use him as a model for some of my work. Okay, so this is a quote from him. Every person must choose how much truth he can stand. I think this is from his book, When Nietzsche Wept, and Nietzsche's another person that I quoted. Every person must choose how much truth they can stand. So sometimes I work with people, and I'm specifically thinking of a book I read too, Blind by Betrayal, or Blind to Betrayal. Sometimes I work with people that they just don't see what's really happening. They just aren't able to consume or to process the reality of a tough situation. I think, when we talk about betrayals, or maybe like I do a lot of affair recovery in my work, or the betrayal that maybe a child feels when they feel betrayed by their parents, maybe through neglect or abuse or emotional abuse, things like that. It sends the brain into a really big dilemma, especially child parent. So the child's brain is definitely developing. Children are not many adults. But when you think about, children are wired to go to their parent for safety, because without that, we wouldn't survive as a human race. So we're wired to go to our parents for safety. If our parents are then a source of harm or fear, or they just, send that fight, flight, or freeze part of our brain active, then the brain's like, go away, this person isn't safe for you. But it creates a dilemma for the child. Go towards, go away, and they've actually done some videotaping of experiences like this, and it's really troubling for the brain, and it can create lots of dysfunction. It can look like behaviors later on. It can look like feelings of self-worth, confusion. It can mess up their child-parent relationship. So every person does choose how much truth they can stand. That's why it's important to really kind of meet people where they're at and not go too far, too fast, and kind of really respect that intuitively they kind of know where to go. I know as a school counselor, I learned a lot about that too. Especially, I worked in hospice for a while with grieving kids, and a lot of times they would speak about their parents in the present sense, like he likes or he like, and their parents had already died. It was their way of kind of being where they needed to be. They weren't yet ready to speak in that past tense, and just being real respectful and present with them in that moment. That's what helps them heal. We have such a social, emotional brain that connection and that relationship is more important than anything. Okay, so this one I love. I've quoted this one so many times. It's actually a quote by Friedrich Nietzsche that I learned about him through the previous one, Dr. Yalom, and also Viktor Frankl in The Man's Search for Meaning. Friedrich Nietzsche, he said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." Now, that's definitely a suicidality quote. Viktor Frankl talked about it in the Holocaust one, talking about if somebody had a why to live during the Holocaust in the concentration camps, they had hope that their family would be at home or they'd be reunited. Then they had that extra something to go on and to live. But if they didn't have a why, they didn't necessarily make it. And now I want to kind of take that out of the context of suicidality, and I want to look at it in the context of maybe motivation for children to do well in school. Their why may not be the same why that we want for them. Our why may be because I want you to be independent. I want you to have a job that you love. I want you to be able to go out and do what you want to do, which is really cool. I mean, what else more could we want for our kids? But maybe that's not our kids' why. Maybe they can't grasp that concept yet. Remember, they're not many adults. They haven't had the brain development that we have as adults. They haven't had those life experiences. Their why may be, I want to go to school because I get to go to drama practice after it, or we have basketball this evening, or I love art class. So you want to be really respectful and really just cognizant of what is their why. And if a child or anyone who has a why, then they're likely to find a how. But you can't superimpose that with your own why. It just doesn't work like that. Okay, so this is number 14, and this is by Brené Brown. I love Brené Brown. I love her work. I love that she normalizes the shame and the vulnerabilities and the hard stuff that we all go through that isn't necessarily pleasant. Okay, so this one is... I've pulled from this one a few times. This one's really applicable to situations that sometimes you feel like, gosh, I don't feel supported or liked by people. Don't try to win over the haters. You are not a jackass whisperer. Oh my goodness, Brené. Yes, you're not a jackass whisperer. Don't try to win over the haters. Do what you do. Believe in yourself. Do your best. And that's where it's at. Allow yourself to be vulnerable. If you use all your energy up with the haters and all of the negative comments and people that maybe aren't feeling so good about themselves, trying to bring you down, whether it's intentionally or unintentionally, then really that's so consuming and it limits you so much in life, and life is pretty painful in that respect. So, Brené Brown, thank you for that. Okay, so this is my last favorite quote on this list. It's a long one, but I actually learned about it through Brené Brown's Daring Greatly book. And this one I got printed up. I have it in my group therapy room at my private practice here in Central Florida. And every time I read it, it just speaks to my soul. And it is so very old. So the wording is a little bit different than what the ways that we communicate today. Okay, so this is by Theodore Roosevelt. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself a worthy cause, who, at the best, knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that the place his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Oh my goodness, what a quote. Theodore Roosevelt said that. Brene Brown wrote a book called Daring Greatly. Really speaks to believe in yourself. Don't let people that are critical try to bring you down. Know that the people that take risks, sometimes they fail. And the critics are going to point out when they fail. But if you don't take risk and you kind of stay in that safe zone because people are pointing out when you fail, then you're missing out. And then you really don't know victory. Oh my goodness, that's so good. I love that quote. It's so long though. Okay. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I would love for you to hop in Play Therapy Community Facebook group and share some of your favorite quotes. I just love quotes. They can be so applicable and they can bring us together in so many ways. All right. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care. Bye.
To join our growing community for free, just go to playtherapycommunity.com and find us on Facebook too.
Thanks for listening to the Play Therapy Community Podcast. Until next time, bye-bye.